Hi, everybody. I'm Gwendolyn Sterk of Sterk Family Law, and I have the honor and privilege to be with Dr. Kevin Germino of Orand Park, Illinois. He's been a pediatrician in our community for approximately 29 years, and we've got a lot of questions for him today. Welcome, Kevin.
Well, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
As you know, we practice family law, and there's a lot of questions that are coming up in our dialogue with our clients. So I'm just going to get started. A lot of people are saying, even to us as family law attorneys, how do we communicate with our children about the concerns of COVID? What would be your recommendation?
Well, a lot of that, of course, is age dependent. The younger the age, the more simple and basic the conversation. I think teenagers, they're probably not going to come to you, so you're going to have to kind of watch for cues and see what their behavior are to get an idea of what they may need to discuss. The younger kids, you keep it simple. You answer their question directly. So sometimes as adults, we overthink things and we want to explain away everything. And the child may just have a very simple question, and we just tell them what's going on. It's a virus, and the virus can make you sick, and the virus can make other people very sick. And so we need to be careful, and this is why we can't necessarily see Grandpa this Thanksgiving, because we don't want to get Grandpa sick. And it can be that simple of a conversation to answer their questions.
Sure. Fair enough. I think that's good advice. And parents are also having this trouble wondering, with winter here and now the kids are indoors and the quarantine issues. Do you have any pointers for keeping kids healthy and active during this period of time?
Well, in terms of healthy, actually the one advantage of this quarantine is we are going to limit contact with other people, which means this is probably going to be a milder flu season and upper respiratory infection season. I haven't seen a single case of flu yet this year, and normally I've seen dozens by now. In terms of keeping active, well, the winter is coming, and of course people like to stay inside in the winter, but the forest preserves are still open. You can put on a hat, a jacket, and gloves and go for a walk as a family. When the snow comes, we can start having tobogganing and build snowmen and go outside and play. Inside, there are plenty of videos that you can do, apps and videos which let kids exercise. And even the gaming systems now, there's obstacle courses, there's boxing, there's kicking, there's many things that we can do to keep us active. Probably the most important thing is the parents have to be active. Children follow the parents' lead. So if the parents are just sitting around and watching football, the child is just going to sit and watch their iPad. So do family activities, live by example.
Very good answer. Obviously there is the issue with routine visits and the telemedicine that's going on. Can you give us any pointers about how to deal with that?
Well, personally, I can't talk about how other offices do it. I will be the first to tell you that I limit my telemedicine visits. I'm not a fan of them. I went into medicine for relationships, for personal contact, to hands-on, to talk to people, and to interact. And as every teacher will tell you, and business people will tell you, it's not the same. Interacting through a video is not the same as being in person. You do what you have to do, but it's not the same. Now, what we do in my office is I have plenty of exam rooms. And so children aren't sitting in the lobby, sitting in the waiting room. We have spaced out our appointments. So there's virtually no contact with any other individuals when you're in the office. And I'm sure many other offices are doing the same thing. We also have restricted the sick visits. If there is a realistic chance, a significant chance that you have been exposed to COVID or have a COVID infection, you're not allowed into the building. Sure, some people do end up coming through, but again, their contact is so limited that you won't run into these people. We are isolating and protecting. During the first peak back in March, my niece was afraid to bring her child in, and I said, my office is the safest place to be because you will not see another individual while you're here.
It's interesting because I do think that people have the fear. I'm hoping that they're getting over it. Have you seen a change in the number of patients that you're seeing, or is it pretty much remain the same through?
In terms of the number of patients who have COVID, or?
No, the number of people that you're seeing, has that been consistent?
It has been consistent. Yes, there was, back in the spring, there was a huge drop off. Everyone pretty much sheltered in place. People have become a little bit more comfortable now, and they realize they still need their visits. And
Right.
so we are back onto a normal schedule, though again, I have decreased the absolute number of people I'll see in a day. So we have limited the number of people, but those numbers are filling up.
And you would encourage people to make those appointments, schedule the routine, schedule everything.
Absolutely. And, worst case scenario, if you're worried, you can tell the doctor's office, I'm going to sit in my car until you can walk me upstairs into my exam room. We will do things, and every office will do things to make sure we do not want a child getting sick in our office.
Right. Absolutely. Right. Now, what if you have a child who's nonverbal and you don't know what to do? You see some of the symptoms, you're worried it's COVID, but then on the other hand, it could just be a simple cold or allergies. So any suggestions for that parent that's struggling?
Well, really no way to tell. There truly isn't, whether they're nonverbal or not. Now, in terms of nonverbal, assessing how sick they are, the parents know these children. They know when they're not right. So, and that's often the case when I have even kids who are younger, children who aren't developmentally delayed. The parent will come in and say, they're just not acting right. And when I hear that, then, the little hairs on the back of your neck stand up and you get aggressive. In terms of COVID, what's the risk of exposure? Are they in a classroom setting? Are the parents working in a high-risk job? Have they gone to a wedding? And all of those things would dictate whether or not we would recommend COVID testing for that individual.
I think that parents are, though, somewhat afraid, because if they are in person in school, they've got those symptoms, they see it at school, then they got to wait for the COVID test to clear, and then you've got the ones that come back and they don't have the solid answer. I've seen parents struggle and say, I've had them tested 3 times to get a solid answer.
Yeah, that in my experience is the exception rather than rule. It certainly does happen. There is no test that's 100%, and without going into great detail, there's also sensitivity versus specificity, and so you have to look at the test that's being done. Here at DePage, and again, this is not a plug for DePage, but I will tell you, our patients, we are doing the tests, and we are getting a very rapid turnaround. In fact, I tested my wife this morning, and it came back this afternoon, and it wasn't the rapid test, so it was the more accurate test. We have a very good system in place, and I've not had to repeat the test on more than a handful of children who got equivocal or an unrecognizable response.
So parents then shouldn't be afraid. They should take the action that they need to provide.
Absolutely. And you know what? The biggest reason why I'm testing children isn't because I need to know whether or not the child has COVID. We know there's no treatment for it. I'm testing children because I want to know who they're potentially exposing, so that the school can know, so that their friends can know, the baseball team can know, so that we can let them know, so that we can hopefully contain this and not let it become a super spreader situation. That's the biggest reason to test.
Got it. Now, a lot of parents, are struggling also with mental health issues, and they're very worried about their children, especially teenagers who might not be able to play sports right now. Any suggestions about what signs to look for or what parents could do in that instance?
Well, it is brutal. And let me tell you, it's not just the teenagers, it's all age groups. We are definitely seeing behavioral problems in the preschool, early school age children. We are seeing the depression and the anxiety in the teenagers. And yeah, I mean, the clues are withdrawing, not talking to friends, not maybe decreased eating, spending more time in their room, isolating, hygiene issues, maybe not showering or changing clothes. They're all the same clues that we all see and many of us are familiar with. The challenge is, how are we dealing with it? And quite honestly, I don't have an easy answer for that. That's probably going to be where the mental health specialists are going to come in. Certainly, we want to keep lines of communication open with our children. We want to make sure we know. We don't want to dismiss them and say, well, when I was a kid, we had this. Their problems are real, and they're different than the problems we had growing up, but they're still real. And in some ways more challenging, because we didn't grow up in social media. And so they have even more pressures than we had. We could just isolate. They can't, ever.
Would you recommend that if a parent is seeing these issues, that they reach out to a child and family therapist that can provide the services?
Absolutely. Or reach out to your pediatrician and or family physician, and they can hook you up with someone. I have a whole list of people that I refer patients to.
And I think that's real important because I think that parents are afraid of it. We still, as much as we're getting past the stigma of mental health, when it comes to our kids, we kind of hover over them and we don't want to have that first step taken, but it's critical, isn't it?
Oh, it's hugely important. And I like to describe to parents and to the children who often are resistant to seeking the help that I think of them being in a dark hole in the ground, and that there's a ladder in that hole that'll get you out. But it's so dark you can't see it. But if you get the help, then they shine the light, and now you can see the ladder and you can climb out. And so that's the starting point. We need to have someone help you shine the light on that ladder so that you can do it. And it's too difficult to do it yourself.
Right, and I think that's important. And I think parents can't do it. They think they can sometimes,
Absolutely.
but they don't have the skills or the capacity.
Absolutely. I have 5 children, and I fully recognize I am not the solution to their problems.
Right. The last thing I want to talk about is that age-old question for all of our clientele in the divorce world. You get parents, and they might be, even before they get divorced, they have to take the child to the doctor, or they get divorced and they either have an allocation judgment with joint decision-making on medical, or even one parent doing it. What kind of precautions do you have, and what should parents know in that instance?
Well, this is always a challenge for pediatricians. First and foremost, if there is one parent that has control of all the medical decisions, they need to let the office know right away. We need to know, and we need to have it in the medical record, and we need the physician and the nurses to know. We really need, I know you worry about privacy and such, but this is a situation where you want the important people to know, the nurses and the doctors to know, because you don't want us to accidentally call the wrong parent or let the wrong parent bring the child in. So we need to know if there is one parent with custody or decision making. Now, when it's most situations, it's joint custody. And fortunately, most of the cases that I've come across in my career, the parents are on the same page. They recognize that the treatments are reasonable and go along with the plan. But, vaccines, for instance, the parents don't always agree. And so, when that happens, I will sit down and talk to the parents, and I'll explain where the position is. And then I tell them, you have to figure out a system and come back to me and let me know. We are not going to be playing phone tag where one parent and one parent and going back and forth. We cannot physically do that. So you need to have a plan before you come into the doctor. And then if there's a question about the treatment when you come in, have them available by phone so we can shoot out an answer and say, this is what we're doing, why we're doing it. So I know it sounds selfish, but keep the doctor out of the middle, because we don't want to do it, but it's not good for your child. You don't need to see the disagreements in the room. You don't need to have indecision made in your child's health. We need to have an organized plan.
Right. And also, I think it's important for people listening, you got to keep the doctor's office updated. So if something changes, so maybe you start out with joint, then it moves to soul, you also have to keep the doctor's office informed. And the other thing is that parents need to realize that just because one of them has decision-making doesn't mean that the other parent doesn't get records. Under Illinois law, everybody's entitled to the medical records of their minor children. So I think it's important that people don't have that conflict. Call your attorney, let's have a conversation. If you have to go to court, unfortunately, because there are disagreements, such as, care, immunizations become an issue, or if there's a major issue with a child, a health issue, and there's different alternatives, sometimes the court has to get involved. But there has to be some, Kurt Vonnegut used to say it, a little less love and a little more common decency, just common decency in how they deal with the doctor's office. So we wanted to address that because I think that sometimes that causes unnecessary stress for the child, like you mentioned.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, and this is where your services come in, because you can have everything in place for us so that then we can do our job, because our focus is the care of the child. That is our concern. We want to do what is best for the child. Now, I recognize the parents do too, and maybe not everyone agrees, but we have to have a common starting point so that we can get to a solution with as little conflict as possible.
And do you have any comments or suggestions to that child who was playing sports and now their world seems a little bit torn underneath them, or their extracurricular activity is gone? and the parents listening and we're hearing about it and they're saying, what am I going to do now?
Well, the reality is sometimes you just can't change things in life. This is a lost year. It's unfortunate, it's unfair, but this is what we have to do, and we have to remind them why we're doing it, that we are trying to protect not only the elderly, we're trying to protect them. Yes, you'll read COVID, most of the people who succumb to COVID are elderly or underlying illnesses. But there are also young, healthy people who are getting heart disease, lung disease, permanent disability. And you know, it's just not worth the risk of engaging in these activities. You've got, for the time being, as unfortunate as it is, we just have to accept the fact that this is the world we live in at the moment, and we have to deal with it.
Right, and it will change at some point. This too will
And it
pass.
will change.
We don't know when, right?
We don't, but I think there's reason to be optimistic by late spring, early summer, that life is going to get back to some closer sense of normalcy. It may not be what it was prior, but it's going to be better. There's going to be a lot of reasons it's better. It's not going to be a novel virus anymore. The vaccine is going to be available to some people. The weather changes. There are going to be things that are going to make it, we expect, to be as less cumbersome as it is at the moment.
Very good. And if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, what should they do?
Well, the office phone number is 708-403-8500. And you know, actually, if you're a DMG patient, you can actually go through my chart and send an email. But outside DMG, you would have to call 708-403-8500.
Very good. Thanks for your time today. We really appreciate it. I think it's useful.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a nice, happy, and healthy Thanksgiving.
You too. Take care.